Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Plant Powered People podcast with your hosts, Michelle Kane
and Tony Okamoto.
Today, we have an exciting episode with Rip Esselstyn. If you're listeners, you may know that we already had Rip's dad on the show, Dr. Esselstyn, and he had talked all about preventing and reversing heart disease, but his whole family is actually quite incredible. And I've been following Rip's work for a long time. And so we were super excited to bring him on the show to tell his very unique and very super inspiring story.
Yeah, a little bit about Rip. After spending 10 years as a professional triathlete, he joined the Austin, Texas Fire Department, and he learned that some of his fellow firefighters were in pretty dire physical condition and that they had extremely high cholesterol, and that more firefighters die from heart attacks than actual fires. So he took action, and we're really excited to share his story and tell you what happened. What makes his story so cool is that Rip and his fellow firefighters shattered misconceptions about the types of people that are plant-based. They normalized for America that people who have really strenuous, physically demanding jobs can thrive on a plant-based. So we hope you enjoy Rip's story as much as we do.
Before we dive into this episode, we want to give a big shout out to our sponsors of the show. We've got Carviva and Maxine's Heavenly Cookies. Carviva is a really awesome fruit and veggie superfood juice and smoothie company. And I really appreciate them because if you look on their bottles at the ingredients, they're so clean. They're made with the healthiest whole foods. For example, their cacao chestnut and pear smoothie is made with oats and flax seeds and quinoa and ground chestnut. They have juices that have mung bean sprouts that they grow hydroponically in their own facilities. So they're just a really innovative, cool, clean brand.
Speaking of innovation, I don't drink, my husband don't drink, and a lot of our friends don't drink alcohol. So I really appreciate their Unwind line, which is an alcohol-free alternative to wine, and it's a first of its kind. Check that out, as well as their juices and smoothies over at carviva.com, KARVIVA.com.
Next up, we have Maxine's Heavenly. Now, I have to say I've been on a huge health kick lately, especially after all our health-inspired podcast episodes we've been recording, but I still do have cookie cravings, and that's where I love Maxine's Heavenly to come in. They make better for you homemade style cookies. They have both crunchy cookies and soft baked cookies that are sweetened without any refined sugars. And the first ingredient of their soft baked cookies are oats. So that is pretty cool. And you can find them at maxinesheavenly.com.
I really love their almond cookies and any chocolate chunk cookies because they're all fantastic. I just love the chocolate chunks so much. You can find them at maxinesheavenly.com, and you can save 25% with the code PLANTS25, PLANTS 25. Again, that is at maxinesheavenly.com.
Hi, Rip. Welcome to the Plant Powered People podcast.
Plant Powered People podcast. A lot of P's, a lot of what's that called?
Alliteration.
A lot of alliterations there.
Yep.
Is that intentional?
Yes. Yes. It rolls off the tongue, and also people remember it.
Right. This is probably before. How long have you had the podcast?
This is our fourth. This is the close to the end of our fourth season.
So it was before
4 years.
Before the PPP loans went out. Yes.
Yeah, we thought, this name is a great idea. But then now that we have to say it 500,000 times and we're always tripping over ourselves, we're like, maybe we should have gone with a one-word name next time. But
Plant Powered People podcast. No, it's good. It's like when Nick Cage in Valley Girls, he had a thing where he would say, what would he say? He would say, Well, Peter Piper picked a pepper. I guess I did. Anyway, it reminds me of that.
Yeah, it's like we're warming up for acting. Like before you're going to go on the stage and you have to do a whole bunch of alliteration. We get to do that
Yeah.
every time before our podcast.
Woohoo.
Anyway, we're so excited to have you on the show. I actually remember reading the Engine 2 Diet, your book, back in 2009. I had just graduated college. I had just started a YouTube channel about vegan things, and someone gave me your book and said I had to read it. And I will be honest, at first I thought, I'm not a firefighter and I'm not really so much about diet culture. So, and I'm young. Like, does this relate to me? But once I opened the book, I could not put it down. It was riveting. And the story is so powerful. I ended up finishing that book. I actually made a YouTube video about it. It was one of my first YouTube videos. I bought and sent the book to a whole bunch of people. And I actually don't even have a copy today because it's like every time I get a copy, I have to give it to someone. Because I'm like, you have to read this. So it has stood the test of time. Such an
Nice.
amazingly empowering story. And now that Tony and I have this podcast, I just was like, we need to bring Rip on to share this story with our community in case they haven't heard it yet. So we're so excited to have you on today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's always exciting for me to now going back, gosh, almost 14 years from when I wrote the Engine 2 Diet book. And it was a really exciting time in my life. And looking back now, I just can't believe how all the dots have connected and opportunities presented themselves for me to become a crusader and an advocate for, all things plant-based. I never dreamed that I'd be where I am today. So would love to go back and visit where it all started.
Okay, so I'm really curious to know more about your upbringing because you grew up with parents who were at the forefront of the Whole Foods movement. Your dad is Dr. Esselstyn, who we just had on our show to talk about reversing heart disease, and your mom is a whole food recipe superhero, and even your sister Jane is a plant-based cookbook author and health educator. So what was that like? And were you always vegan? And how did that all go down?
Well, no, nobody in our family was vegan until about 1984. So just to backtrack for a sec. So we grew up eating the standard American diet. Now, there were a couple things that my parents did not allow in our house, and I'm one of 4 children. You mentioned Jane. So Jane's my younger sister. She's about 2.5 years younger than I am. I have a brother, Ted, who's a year younger than I am, and then another brother, Zeb, who's 4 years younger than I am. So we're very tight. But the things that my parents would never allow in the house were white bread and soda pops. But I mean, we did, oh gosh, we did chicken, we did steaks, we did hamburgers, we did BLTs, we did spare ribs like every other weekend at this place that we had out in the country with friends. We did ice cream, Dairy Queen, Burger King, McDonald's. It was, oh God, it was awful looking back on it. But that all changed in 1984 when my father started his research at the Cleveland Clinic to show that you can not only prevent, but in many cases reverse heart disease. And he decided, and you had him on the podcast, so he probably talked about this, but he decided that if he was going to ask this first cadre of really intrepid souls who were considered the Walking Dead, if he was going to ask them to do something as radical and extreme as eat, kale and broccoli and steel cut oats and sweet potatoes and cauliflower steaks and stuff like that, then he needed to kind of be lockstep with his patients to understand the journey. And so my mother, who has just been always so infinitely supportive of everything that my father embarks on, and also all of her children, was right there. And she was really the one that, when the rubber meets the road, the one that made it happen in the kitchen. And this is before there were more than maybe one or two cookbooks on eating this way. I mean, today it's a completely different world and universe when it comes to all things plant-based. So they were really the gutsy, courageous ones that were doing this, and there wasn't that much research, and there wasn't that many recipes and stuff like that. So she was like, I think John McDougall has referred to my mother as Julia Childs on steroids, which is so absolutely true. Her energy and her enthusiasm, and her ability to just keep plowing forward in the face of failure and criticism and everything was really phenomenal. But so my mom and dad started in 1984, and the rest of us kids really didn't pick up that plant strong torch until about for me, it was 1987 after I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. And now I was free from the athletic training table that I was eating at, because I was a swimmer at the University of Texas. And I would eat there on the training table with the football players and the basketball players and the tennis players and the golfers. And it was, oh gosh, I mean, it was chicken fried steak and huge mammoth, lamb and ribs and cheeseburgers and cheese sandwiches and soft serve ice cream machine as much as you want, and brownies and apple pie and puddings. And, maybe there were some sides of, black eyed peas and spinach that was dunked in Crisco or butter or oil, and the same thing with any other veggies. But so as soon as I graduated, because I know that whenever I went home for Thanksgiving or Christmas or sometimes parts of the summer, I would get exposed to what my parents were doing. And I've always been such an avid admirer of my mom and my dad that I never rebelled against this way. I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. And I love the research that my father's doing with these, kind of mortally wounded heart patients. And I was absolutely happy to explore going down this plant-based path. And so for me, it's really, I jumped in January of 1987 and haven't looked back, and obviously have just been refining the whole way of living since then. That's a long answer to your question.
It's just so fascinating. I'm just like, you live the dream partly you live the dream of what all our listeners to this podcast are like, oh, my family will never understand. And it's so cool that you never rebelled against your parents' philosophy on food and all the knowledge that they were gaining. Because it must have been hard. Like, did you have challenges when you'd go home and be like, okay, but I'm going to sneak off and have a cheeseburger or something like that? Or you were just like, this is delicious and easy.
Or even something like white bread. I'm going to go have a vegetarian sandwich with white bread and a Coke.
No. And keep in mind, like, before I decided to really do this and do it right in 1987, I would come home and I would be all into it, but then I would come back to, University of Texas at Austin, and I'd do the Domino's pizzas and the root beer and all that. I mean, all the naughty stuff, right? The contraband. It wasn't like after 3 or 4 meals at home, I had to go out to a restaurant and get, something else. But I will tell you this.
Cheers to your mom for cooking amazing food. I bet that's part of it.
And there were times when my mom, she would make a meal and it bombed. It completely bombed. But the sentiment behind what she was doing was something that we all admired and respected so much that we basically, we sucked it up and said, you know what, don't make this again, or figure out a way to to make this a little bit more palatable or something. Yeah. And now I look at, like you guys, I've got a podcast as well, and it's crazy how many people now solicit me to come on the podcast to share their new vegan plant-based recipe book. I mean, the amount of people that are writing recipe books and doing amazing things in this space, it's phenomenal. And there's just no shortage of just delectable, tasty plant-based foods.
Yeah, well, thank you for being one of the people paving the way for that, because it does feel like now I could step back and the work is still being done by 5 billion people, but it didn't used to be like that. It used to feel like everything's on your shoulders because there's no one else doing the work. And there was about a decade of that. But okay,
well, just to give you an example, like when I first wrote the Engine 2 diet, the first iteration of it, the first printing, they were so convinced. So I went with a big publishing house, and they were so convinced that the United States of America was not ready for a fully plant-based message that they insisted that in a certain number of the recipes I had as an optional ingredient for people to put in chicken or fish, right? And so after it was selling very, very well, the number 2 printing of it, we immediately got rid of the chicken and the fish. And I was rather upset that they were making this kind of demand of the recipe section of the book. But I really wanted the book to get out there, and they turned out to be a fantastic publishing house. So anyway, but that goes to show you back in 2009 how the plant-based thing, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah. It was before Forks Over Knives. It was before all of it. Yeah, it just wasn't on the radar of people.
Yeah, there were 2 big books that had come out, in the previous 3-4 years. One was the China Study by Colin Campbell in 2005. And then my father's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, came out in 2007. And then, of course, you have people like, John McDougall, truly one of the granddaddies of the movement. And his book, I believe, came out in 1986 or 85, McDougall Medicine. And then you had John Robbins that wrote Diet for a New America that came out in 1987. And you've got Dean Ornish, who's got his book, his first book on reversing heart disease that I believe came out in the early 2000s. So, but that's really about it.
Yeah. It was a long road, but it feels like now we're on this just skyrocketing trajectory of just knowledge being mainstream, more mainstream. So that's exciting.
It's skyrocketing. I know I keep interrupting you, but it's skyrocketing, and it can't happen fast enough.
Yes. Yeah. I know. It's like, it feels like it's happening so fast, but also so slow. You're like, wait, but no one around me still is eating plants. So, it's, it truly can't happen fast enough, but okay. So I want to get into your firefighting days, but first I'm just curious, how did you get into firefighting and why? And then we can go down that path.
Good question. So as soon as I graduated from the University of Texas in January of 1987, I was trying to figure out what to do for a career. And I majored in speech communications. And I went back to Cleveland, Ohio for about 5-6 months. And I was interviewing at a bunch of different companies in a sales position. And I just was like, this feels like a slow, painful death, any of these sales jobs. And I went on a couple one-day trial runs with some of these salespeople. And I came home. I remember coming home one night and telling my parents that I can't do this. And in August of 1986, so I hadn't graduated yet, a friend of mine asked me to be his support crew for a triathlon that he was doing in Canton, Ohio. And so I was like, oh, sure, I'd love to. So I went down with him and I watched him compete against about 1,000 other people. And I saw these stallions, these human-looking stallions, cross the finish line. And I've always loved competition, loved it, right? Doesn't matter what it is. I love competing. I have had a background obviously in swimming, always loved to bike, was always a decent runner. And that seed was planted there. And I can remember telling my parents, you know what? I don't want to do a 9-to-5 sales job gig. Instead, I want to see if I can be a professional triathlete. And so I started as an age grouper, and I started competing in different triathlons. And within about 3 months, I had gotten top 10 at 3 different races. They have to be United States Triathlon Series United States Triathlon let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? Sanctified or something. And so I was able to get my pro card. And so my first race as a professional triathlete was the Chicago International Triathlon in August of 1987. And I got 9th place out of over 4,000 people. And I won a check for $900. And that's all I needed, the confidence that I needed to take me down this path. And I did this exclusively for the next decade. And so that's what I did. I was doing the triathlon, swimming, biking, and running. I became one of the premier swimmers in the sport. I became one of the top 10 in the United States at the International Distance Triathlon, which is a 1.5 kilometer swim. It's a 40 kilometer bike and then a 10 kilometer run. And then at about the age of 32, I decided that I was ready. I'd been doing this for almost 10 years.
Well, as an athlete, were you plant-based that whole time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. That's that's one of the things. That's one of the things. As soon as I left University of Texas and went back to Cleveland, so I'm with my parents, right? And I'm living with my parents for about 5 months before I moved back to Austin, Texas to train full time and live on a friend's floor. I kept a little mattress behind his couch. And that's all I did. I trained and I ate well and I got to bed on time. And this is what I did. This was my career. And I loved it. But at some point, the flying in airplanes and racing for a paycheck and going after sponsors got old. And I was looking forward to my next move. And I had some triathlete friends who were also firefighters. These were age group triathlete friends who were firefighters. And they said, you know what? You should consider being a firefighter. It is like no 2 shifts are ever the same. You go out every shift and you do like 10 to 15 good deeds. And it's really like a big old slumber party where we have all kinds of fun and, we do good deeds. And so I went out for a ride at Central Station, which is really the animal house of all the fire stations here in Austin. There's probably 46, 47 now. Austin is now the 11th largest city in the United States. And we've got over probably 1,200 firefighters here. So I did a ride out at Central and I was like, this is amazing. Doing such good work and you're doing it as a team. And remember, this is something that I'd been without, is doing triathlons for almost a decade. It was very solo. I had training partners, but it was for the most part a very solo profession. And the thing is, it took me 3 years to get on with the Austin Fire Department. It's because the first year I applied, there were over 4,000 people applying for 12 positions, which is rough. And if you were ex-military, you got 5 extra points on the civil service exam. And so the civil service exam was 100 multiple choice question. And And I remember I got a 96 and it put me at like 220th on the list. And I was like, oh my
Wow.
gosh. But I kept trying and I kept trying. And then the third year that I tried, I was fortunate enough to be like 36 on the list, and they were taking like 41 people. So I got on. I actually, after doing a 6-month fire suppression school and also getting my emergency medical technician license, I came out to Central Station where I did that one ride out, and it had 2 engines there. Each engine is occupied by 4 firefighters. It had a truck with 4 firefighters and an EMS vehicle that's 2 EMS people. So there were 18 people at that station that are sleeping there, eating there. You would not believe the testosterone, and it was all guys. Back then, there were no women, no women. So anyway, I will stop there and let you guys ask a question.
Well, first, I was wondering if part of your reason for becoming a firefighter was to save lives, like because obviously you're putting your life on the line, and
Oh,
it's just known to be the ultimate
yeah,
role of
yeah,
like representing strength and also dedicating your own life to
yeah.
save lives.
Yeah. No, absolutely. When I say do good deeds, because I think I said, yeah, to do good deeds, but
Mhm.
in parentheses after that is to help people and to save lives. Absolutely. There's nothing quite as gratifying, especially when you're doing that, when you're responding to that tone, that 911 emergency call that goes off, and you are helping somebody or some family when they are when they need it the absolute most.
Right.
And so, no, yeah, super gratifying. Super.
Okay. So you become a firefighter partly to save lives. And then at some point, you realize the leading cause of death for firefighters is not fires, but heart attacks. Like, when
Yeah.
does this sort of come together in your mind uh, to where you're seeing this discrepancy of you're out there saving lives every day, and yet you're putting your life on the line, but most people are actually putting their life on the line in a different way?
Yeah. Well, you know what was interesting is that when I signed up for this job, I thought that the vast majority of our calls, we would be making fires. That's
Hmm.
what the name is. We're firefighters. What I quickly discovered, but it probably took 2 years, is that we made fires, but the fires were kind of few and far between. The vast majority of our calls were medical calls, and so we were responding to the dearth of chronic Western disease that is at America's doorstep right now. So, people with chest pain, people that have literally like redlined. They've had a heart attack and they're pulseless and breathless, and we got to try and bring them back to life. People that with a diabetic emergency because their blood glucose has gotten too low, and you wouldn't believe how many type 2 diabetes calls we went on for people whose blood sugar had was either too high or too low. Lifting assistance calls for people that were over typically 300 pounds, and EMS needed us to come and help them move them into the ambulance. Um, Stroke, people with strokes, Alzheimer's and dementia. And then when we're talking to them, we always ask them, what medications are you on? And then we hear the cocktail of medications that they're on, how they've already had, this is their third heart attack or their second brush across the bow with breast cancer or some sort of cancer. Oh yeah, I've got high blood pressure. I'm on these medications for cholesterol, these for diabetes. It is vast. And so the irony in all that is that, the ultimate life-saving event happened at our own fire station, right? With one of my fellow firefighting brothers who at the age of 33 had a total cholesterol of 344 milligrams per deciliter. and who had a family history of men in his family perishing from heart disease before the age of 50.
I'd like to take a moment of gratitude for those firefighters like you and your colleagues, because I have had experience with firefighters 2 different times, and both of those situations were similar to how you described. One, my grandfather had a heart attack, and I remember getting there, and it's so scary. And to have people who are calm and collected and who are helping you understand and navigate the situation is so calming. And then the other one was actually recently when a loved one lost consciousness, and it was the first question was what medications were you taking, and
Mm-hmm.
part of the loss of consciousness was because of the medication. And so I'm just so grateful to have these public servants who are providing services, especially here in California, where there is really great risk of fire, but also people who are providing families with comfort and calmness in uncertain, super scary times.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I can't even tell you how much I love and adore firefighters, men and women. Most of us are cut from the same cloth and have huge, huge hearts and are willing to, for the most part, risk it all. And there's a certain, fraternal bond between all firefighters, really around the world. And I can remember going to the police fire World Games in 2001 in Indianapolis, Indiana, and just being amazed at how well the firefighters from around the world just kind of got along, and you just immediately feel this connection and this bond, because you know what we've all kind of been through, what we've seen. And I can tell you that, when you have a crew of 4 or 5 and you go on some of these nutty calls, let's say it's a traffic accident where you have 2 fatalities, and you're doing triage and you're trying to figure out, who needs help and whose life can we save, and all that stuff. You immediately, you bond with your firefighting brothers and sisters that you make that call with in a hurry, in a
Mm-hmm.
hurry. And one of the things I can tell you is that a lot of firefighters are now suffering from PTSD because of what
Mm-hmm.
they've had to see and witness, and the amount of death and destruction that firefighters see on a consistent basis. It it rattles you. It rattles you. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it's just tragedy after tragedy that you have to be exposed to. It must have also been crazy that on one end of your life, your dad was working on preventing and reversing heart disease and had this solution and was, saving patients at the end. And on the other hand, you're seeing almost every day the result of people that didn't get that help. And knowing like things could have been different. I know that's something that most of us here listening hold with our own friends and family who it's like, it's hard to figure out how to get that message or that information out there. And you see the consequences of just someone not knowing the information that's out there. So that's a lot to carry as well.
Yeah,
Um,
isn't that the most, that is the great irony, is that, as a profession, and you just said it, firefighters more than any other profession have the highest incident of heart attacks and death on the job. And my father really was able to provide the most profound evidence in the medical literature showing that we can actually reverse the number one killer of not only firefighters but also Americans just by changing what we eat.
Yeah. So what was the moment that inspired you to take action and to kind of shift that focus and try and save the lives of your fellow firefighters? Take
Well,
us through that journey.
yeah. Well, keep in mind that um, I had been with, I had worked with some of these firefighters for about 6 years. And I remember I came out to Central Station, which is fire station number one. And then in 2001 or 2002, I made the transition to fire station number two. It was just time. It was time for a change from not sleeping at all and 18 guys at a fire station and going to a smaller one engine firehouse. And a couple of the guys, we all together, we went to fire station two. And we were super close, God, just like family. And one night we were sitting out on the porch, looking out over Martin Luther King Boulevard, staring at McDonald's that was to the left of us, Jimmy John sandwich shop that was to the right of us, Pizza Hut. What else? Anyway, just a litany of different fast food restaurants. And we just made this bet, like, okay, let's see who's the healthiest of all of us. And so the next day we drove down, took the fire engine, and we drove to this lab, and we all got tested. And that's when my buddy JR, his cholesterol came back, and it was 344. And that's when he was visibly shaken, because in NOAA's firefighters, we have an annual physical. And the highest that he had ever seen it was maybe 260. And so 333 was now ridiculously high. And then he also shared with us that his father had a triple bypass surgery at the age of 50. His grandfather died at 49, and his great grandfather died at like 48 from heart disease. And so he obviously had a genetic predisposition, in addition to the fact that he was a self-proclaimed third-generation redneck. So every meal, he typically had some sort of fried meat that was on his plate. And so that was the impetus where I was like, guys, you know, the research that my father has done. You know what I was able to do as a world-class triathlete, fueling myself this way. And you guys are not going to be shrinking violets. So let's start doing this, and let's just start with lunch. And so we started where we would come in together as a unit, and we would take turns who would buy the ingredients, and we would just make we called it the almighty burritos. And it was brown rice and beans and onions and garlic and spinach. And then we had a nice little red sauce on top. And we did that for lunch for several months. And then we decided to up the game. And we decided to go lunch and dinner. And then we went from lunch and dinner to breakfast, and then lunch before we left. And that's also when I challenged JR. I said, do this, but don't just do it at the firehouse, because know that when you come into work in Austin, you're 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So we come in at noon and we get off at noon the next day. And then you'd be off for 48 hours. So I said, JR, also continue to do this at home. And then let's do this for 28 days, right? Give it like a real like firefighter effort here. And then let's see where the chips land. And his cholesterol dropped from 343. I said 333. It was 344. It dropped from 344 to 196 in 28 days. And he dropped like 14 pounds, and his energy increased, and he was sleeping better, and his acid reflux went away, and no more constipation. So that's really what started this tradition at Fire Station 2 on the C shift. And that started in 2003. And then remember, I wrote my first book in 2000. It came out in 2009. I spent 2 years writing it. Early 2000, or actually late 2006 is when I started it.
So what happened next? Did you then take this just success story and this family of tight-knit firefighters who were either cheering him on or wanting to try for themselves? How did you expand it to the whole of Engine 2? And then what did that look like? How did it go for people?
Well, like I said, we started with just the almighty burritos for lunch. And then once we had, kind of moved to lunches, dinners, and breakfasts, and then leftovers for dinner for lunch before we went home, we were in. And we took turns. We had a list on the back of, I think it was Scotty, who was my lieutenant, his locker, where we put down whose turn it was to shop, and also not only shop, but also decide what the meal was going to be. And the goal was, and you guys would appreciate this because, you're plant-based on a budget. The goal was always to see who could make the most amazing meal for the least amount. And because at the end of the day, he would show the receipt and then we'd split it up. So if it was $20, we'd each toss in $5. And the one thing you never want to do at a fire station is cook short, meaning there's not enough for everybody. If you do that, it's a big no-no, and you will get razzed forever for that.
That's also my personal fear. That's my personal fear is hosting a party and my guests running out of food before they're done eating. Whew. Oh man, I understand.
Let's go lunch.
Let's finish the job. Yeah,
I love it.
So lunch is usually just a sweet potato with some sort of beans. Usually it's I like saving black beans usually for dinner. So let's just say it's a sweet potato with pinto beans, and then I usually batch cook. We usually batch cook on the weekend, so I've got all these sweet potatoes. So I'll take a big honking sweet potato. I don't actually eat the skin, so I usually take the skin off, and then I kind of cut it up and then mush it up with a fork on top of a bed of either loose leaf spinach or chopped up kale or romaine lettuce. Then I put down the sweet potato. Then I put down the pinto beans. And then it's usually mango again. I just love mango in this dish. And it's a little bit of low sodium tamari. If I have a what is it? Oh, if I have a salsa, I'll put some salsa on top, and then I always finish it off with a little sriracha. And that's my favorite lunch, unless I've got leftovers from dinner that I put into a pita bread sandwich or on a bed of greens. We always try and get green leafies in at every meal. And then for dinner, Tony and Michelle, it is, I'm just going to say, rice and beans extravaganza. So it's brown rice. I usually, if we don't have something in the rice cooker, I'll just take out the instant 3-minute, brown rice that you make in the microwave. Throw that in a bowl, put on the black beans, put on the sliced up tomatoes, water chestnuts, bell peppers, half of an avocado, what else? Green onions, and then do the sriracha, and that's really that would be that's not only my favorite breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but to me, it's also the most economical breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you're on a budget.
You just named my perfect meal. That is it. It sounds delicious. I'm salivating over here thinking about your dinner.
Well, Rip was describing the sweet potato. Tony, I was picturing your plant-based on a budget cookbook. And I was like, that's the cover. Before it was mashed up and put on salad.
Yeah.
How about that? Wow.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, I feel like we could talk to you forever. There's a lot of work that you do that currently, helping people, eat plant strong, and you have immersion programs and you have books and resources for people. So, we will include a bunch of that in the show notes, but I would love to hear from you if there's any final words of inspiration you'd like to share, and then where people can find you, and if there's any just like must consume resources recommendations that you have.
um, no, thanks. This has been a lot of fun, Michelle and Tony. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, for anybody that's interested and you want to know more about what we do at Plan Strong, you can go to planstrong.com, and we have a very robust website with all of our different offerings, as you mentioned, from our 6-day retreat programs in Sedona, Arizona, and Black Mountain, North Carolina. That's right outside of Asheville. We have our meal planner. We have our online coaching program with some fantastic coaches. And then if you want to go to planstrongfoods.com, we have this is really a spinoff of the Engine 2 products at Whole Foods. And it's called Plan Strong, and they're available in other outlets besides Whole Foods. We've gone outside the Whole Foods universe under the new name Plan Strong. And we also do a lot of direct to consumer with all of our products. So from our cereals to our granolas to our pizza crust kits to our ready to eat chilies and stews and our unsalted broths to kind of help elevate cooking. So anyway, all those are there. Of course, I also have, over the course of the last 12 years, I've written 4 books. So the first was Engine 2. And then in 2013, I wrote Plan Strong, that is 36 different chapters, and each one really addresses all the different objections that people will bring to you when you let them know that you're plant-based or thinking about going plant-based. And so I make it easy for people to help when people approach them with, well, where do you get enough protein? And this is going to be too expensive. And there's no variety. And what about athletes? And what about my children? So that's nice. And then my third book is called The Engine 2 7-Day Rescue Diet. And Tony and Michelle, we really should have a whole episode that talks about this. But it was the learnings that I developed in my first 5 years working at Whole Foods when John Mackey asked me to run these 7-day medical immersion programs for Whole Food Market's unhealthiest team members. They had to medically qualify in order to attend. And we did before and after biometric screenings, everything from weight, blood pressure, complete lipid panel, from total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, fasting glucose. And the results were just jaw-dropping, how quickly the human body wants to right the ship and get healthy. And it far exceeded anything that I ever imagined, that my father ever thought could happen. But this is what happens when you're doing it and you're doing it right. And when we have people locked up in jail, right, in either Sedona or outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and they're 10 miles away from the closest store, you got no choice but to eat the food that we serve, and the body always responds. So, so that was my third book, because I wanted people to understand, listen, anybody can do anything for 7 days. And my bet is your eyes will be opened up to a new way of looking at food and the power of food that you never even dreamed was possible. And so, yeah, you may not be perfect or even plant-based 100% going forward, but you will have changed your relationship with food. And then the last book I wrote was called The Engine 2 Cookbook with my sister Jane, and it's about 150 mouth-watering, lip-smacking, body-slimming recipes to live plant strong. Yeah.
That's awesome. Rip, we'll have to send you, Tony and I made a mini documentary. It's a 10-minute mini documentary called 7 Days. And we took someone who was eating a fast food diet and we put them on a plant-based diet for 7 days and recorded everything. And it was pretty inspiring. I'll have to send you.
Wow.
I'll have to send you that. I've also had the Rip's Big Bowl cereal that you have on the Plant Strong Foods website, and it is so good. So if you're just looking for an easy out to not have to do the work yourself, I endorse that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll have to get you two on my podcast. That would be fun.
Oh my gosh.
That would be awesome.
That would be so cool. That would be so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we'll link,
and maybe
we'll link your podcast too.
yes.
Oh, I forgot to talk about that. Yeah, we got the Plant Strong podcast. It's been going on. So you guys launched yours, you said 4 years ago. I launched mine in January of 2019. So yeah, you guys I think we're a little ahead of me then.
A little bit, but it's exciting. Having resources that you can use and learn from while you are driving or doing the dishes is a true gift to humanity.
And also everyone resonates with a different personality and approach, and having more resources to choose from is an amazing gift.
It is, and there's lots. Yeah, but plant powered and plant strong. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good combo.
All right.
We're a match made. Okay.
Thank you so much again for joining our podcast, and we will have to get you back on talking about all of your books and digging into each of them because they all sound amazing.
Well, I would love that, and thanks for the opportunity to join you guys today, and all the best to you guys and all your listeners.
Thanks you so much. Bye-bye.
Quick reminder to check out our sponsors of the show. We've got Carviva for some functional organic juices and smoothies and their Unwind collection.
Bye-bye.
You can find them at carviva.com. And also don't forget to pick up some healthier for you cookies from Maxine's Heavenly. You can get 25% off with the code PLANTS25 at maxinesheavenly.com.
That was a really great conversation with Rip. He has shown in multiple ways how vegans can thrive on a plant-based diet. And he's done so as a triathlete. I know people are always wondering, can people who eat plant-based thrive while doing really hardcore physical activity? And he not only did it as a triathlete, but also as a firefighter. Firefighters are superheroes, and he did it and also had his whole fire station doing the thing. So kudos to Rip for being inspiring to me, Michelle, his whole fire station, and the whole country, really. That was a great conversation.
I definitely encourage all of you listening to check out his book. If you haven't already, you can read the full story, share it with a friend. It's called The Engine 2 Diet, and we'll link it up in the show notes. We'll also, if you're new to listening to the Plant Powered People podcast, we've done a whole slew of episodes with really inspiring, health-inspired messages. And individuals. So we will link those in the show notes as well. You can find them at plantpoweredpodcast.com. We also have a podcast email list. I'm not sure if all of you know that, but we have an email list, and we send an email when our new podcast episodes come out with a little synopsis of who it's featuring and what it's about. And also sometimes share some other fun things we have going on. So you can subscribe to that also at plantpoweredpodcast.com. Hope you all have the most beautiful day. Eat some healthy foods and lots of plants, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.